Hi there, Lauren. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I almost said good morning, and then I was like, it's not morning for either of us. So,
Yeah.
no, wrong choice.
Yep.
What is the time there? Are you 2 hours or 3 hours?
2:30. So I
Okay,
don't,
yeah. So you're
yeah.
2 hours ahead of us. It's 12:30 here.
Okay.
But
Yep. It's
yeah.
almost morning.
Yeah,
It's
it's
appropriate.
I mean, is it though? So funny. Well, I am excited for our conversation today. We're going to talk about some good stuff that I think my listeners will be, I think everyone will be able to relate to. So, but before we do that, can you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. My name is Lauren Auer, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, and I'm located in central Illinois. I have my own practice here,
Okay.
but I'm also licensed in Florida and Connecticut, which is kind of random.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so I've been doing the private practice thing for about 5 years now. But before that, I was working in various community mental health agencies,
Okay.
mainly with complex trauma, like rape crisis,
Mm,
also working with offenders and victims,
hmm.
kind of getting the full picture of what trauma can look like at every level. And so I decided to kind of roll that into my own practice.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
and I heard you on another podcast. That's how I found you.
Okay.
And you were talking about boundaries on that podcast, but which was really interesting too, and I think a good topic. But then I went onto your website and was like, wait. She knows a lot about trauma. That is
Yeah.
what this podcast is all about. Like, how do we help our kids heal from trauma? How do we recognize our own trauma?
Mhm.
Trauma's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we're parenting kids from hard places or have experienced adversity, we risk that having secondary trauma, or our biological kids maybe having secondary trauma from having foster kids come in and out, or even compassion fatigue, blocked care, those types of things. And so that's kind of where I was like, wait, can we actually talk about that instead?
Yeah. Yeah. We
'Cause-
can talk
so
about anything.
yeah. So I'm really excited to just jump into some of that. But I am curious, like so you have a lot of, the other thing I really love is how you know a lot about trauma and you're very would you say trauma informed, trauma aware? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I don't, honestly, I don't have much of a preference. I feel like those things can be kind of thrown around
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and have kind of lost a lot of meaning because of that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. I guess both trauma
Yeah.
informed and trauma aware. I think I kind of stumbled into it a little bit.
Hmm.
Like I said, working in community mental health in like more trauma environments.
Yeah.
Initially was working with offenders, juvenile offenders of sexual abuse, as
Okay.
well as victims and their family. And that really kind of gave me this picture of these different levels of what trauma can look like, not just from the victim's point of view, but also the
Yeah.
offenders and the other people in their life that are impacted by that. And then, I worked in those environments for quite a while, and I became the director of that program. And so then I kind of added this layer of working with the other helpers and therapists
Mhm.
and caseworkers that were working with these traumatized clients and dealing with their own trauma, and how some of these stories and cases that we were working with could be traumatizing. And
Yeah.
then I had a lot of opportunities doing that job as well, to do training for like police and school staff and
Oh,
hospital
wow.
staff. And so it was really, again, just like all of these layers of trauma and how that
Hmm.
can look, you know, not just for the person, but all the people around them, and
Yeah.
layered on top of their own stuff. Meanwhile, I'm having kids, I'm dealing with that, and,
Hmm.
dealing with staff who have their own life things going on, and life doesn't stop, and
Mm-mm.
I started my own practice in 2020. So
Okay.
had a whole layer of,
Yeah.
pandemic on that. And yeah, I guess when I think about like trauma informed or trauma aware, um, a lot of that was just me being in these environments where I kept seeing it from all these different angles and lenses. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just become like how I see the world and how I work
Yeah.
with everybody. So
Yeah.
I feel like I need to make up my own term for that. I don't know.
I know, right? I
Yeah.
know. I had a guest on like a year ago and we were talking about he worked a lot with teens and college students and
Mhm.
had his own childhood trauma, and his thing was, you once you know about trauma, you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true. And I think that's where that can be hard to want to step into that and learn about trauma and become more trauma informed, trauma aware, whatever you want to call it, because it is that. Like once you open that door, you do start to see it everywhere.
Mhm.
So what do you do with that? Like how do we reduce that barrier so that we can get more parents, coaches, teachers, doctors like to learn more about trauma and not just like scratch the surface type of trauma awareness, but like actually get it.
Yeah. I know. I think it's hard because for me, it's like once you start seeing things through that lens, you also see that that's where the healing happens and that it
Mhm.
works.
Mhm.
And there's kind of no other way, but getting somebody to like buy into that of, they're, for instance, like very frustrated, let's say with a problem student or something
Mhm.
that keeps giving them so many issues and is really disruptive. And to kind of have that buy-in of, how about we approach this from a different angle? What's
Mhm.
that kid going through? What might that kid be trying to communicate in, a very dysregulated way, but still trying to communicate that? And, I think that sometimes, I guess the buy-in can be that people can get to the point where they're so frustrated that they'll try anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so sometimes just, how about you just do this, say it this way, ask this way, whatever it is. And once they start doing that, I feel like the results are usually pretty immediate, that
Yeah.
they're tuning in with that client and they're noticing their own dysregulation, all these things that oftentimes I do think that results are pretty immediate, that that mindset can shift so fast. But I just think that's not how we're wired.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think that with young kids, I'm encouraged that I'm seeing things like my kids being taught like emotional expression and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff in the schools now. I know I didn't have that growing up.
Yeah.
It
I
is
know.
encouraging. I hope that that's moving forward, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think I see that too with some of the families I work with is like they reach out to me and want to learn more about TBRI, trust-based relational interventions, because they feel like they've tried everything else and I've heard about this. And so I haven't tried this. Let's try it. And then they see like, yeah, it doesn't work overnight, but it works.
yeah, yeah.
And so I agree. Like that's unfortunate that that's where it gets to is like a sense of desperation. But I
Mhm.
think that's maybe then can take us to this part of the conversation of like, I think that's where then I'm seeing these families dealing with compassion fatigue or blocked care.
Yeah.
And then they're saying, now I don't know what else to do. I don't know what
Mhm.
else to do. So can we go there now and talk about like
Sure.
what is compassion fatigue? What should people be looking for in themselves to say, oh, maybe that's what I'm dealing with?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that compassion fatigue is really that like bone deep exhaustion that comes from constantly holding space for somebody else without feeling like you're getting anything in return, or that
Hmm.
you're, whether that's from outside sources or from yourself,
Hmm.
and I think most people in some capacity in their life are in some form of role where they're doing for others, whether that's as a parent or in their job or maybe caretaking another family member or something. Um, and so, you know, that can be really good, but we're also not wired to just give and give and give all the time.
Yeah.
And it can be very exhausting to get to that point um, where it just feels like I can't do this anymore, or even you take it a step further to where you have almost like that secondary trauma yourself, where you're
Hmm.
experiencing trauma symptoms that almost mirror the people in your life that are dealing with trauma. And, you know, that can be a really scary thing for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, so I have kind of thrown around a couple of terms: secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, blocked care.
Mm-hmm.
What are the different, like, how do we know what each one is and whether we're experiencing it? What is the difference between those three? Or is
Yeah.
there a difference?
Yeah, there's absolutely a difference. Um, and I'll also throw burnout in there because
Oh,
usually
yeah, for sure.
I think that term is thrown around a lot. I kind of see them as like three layers, um, where, you know, burnout is more of like an overwhelm by demands, like things around you. It's just like too much, not being able to
Hmm.
catch up. And I think most of us experience burnout on some level,
Yeah,
you know, in our life on in day to day. And I kind of compare that to, I'm such a metaphor person. So
I love that.
yeah, I compare that to like a paper cut, right?
Okay.
Like,
Yep.
you know, it happens sometimes, it's distressing, it doesn't feel good, but you can kind of like, as long as you care for it a little bit, you know, give it a little bit of attention, you know, put some ointment on it, a band-aid, whatever, you can pretty much, you know, continue to let that heal, go on with your life, as long as you're not, you know, doing something that's going to continue to like reopen that wound,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Whereas compassion fatigue, I look at that more so as like a sprained ankle,
Hmm.
right? Like you really kind of can't just keep doing what you're doing with it. You
Hmm.
really do have to rest. You really do have to pull back. You have to you know, you have to be a little bit more intentional about that, or it's just going to keep getting worse. You know, if
Hmm.
I just keep walking on a sprained ankle, thinking, you know,
Yeah.
eventually it'll get better, it won't. It's actually going to continue to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And it's going to be more gradual. But if you don't do anything about it, it's just not going to change, right?
Hmm.
It's something that you have to give care to.
Yeah.
Can you still function? Yeah, probably. You might have to, you know, make some exceptions to
Hmm.
things, right? Like have somebody help you out a little bit more with certain things or adjust the way you do things. Same with compassion fatigue. Maybe it means, you know, stopping work when work is over rather than staying
Yeah.
late, having boundaries, asking for help in your life, you know, those sorts of things to kind of get through that period of time. That's really what you need with like compassion fatigue. And
Yeah.
when it gets to the level of secondary trauma,
Yeah.
like to me, that is like a major like traumatic brain injury in
Yeah.
terms of like the metaphor of it all. Um, you know, it's like it happened to you. You're not even really making a choice about whether you're going
Right.
to stop. Like it is just like you absolutely need to have that downtime. You need to take care of it. It's first and foremost. Like this is priority number one. If you're going to continue doing what you're doing, you
Yeah.
need to make sure that you are paying attention to yourself and making sure you get well if you want to keep doing that. And sometimes that means like making major changes in your life, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're a football player, it might mean not playing football anymore. You know,
Hmm.
like it could be a major disruptor. And the same thing with that secondary trauma. When we experience that, you know, at that level, it can look like, um, you know, being really like negative about the work that you're doing or the people you're around, or just like, what's the point? And, you know,
Hmm.
this is, I don't want to do this anymore. Your own mental health is being impacted. Maybe you're feeling really depressed or just like worthless or something. Like there's these deeper things that are kind of symptoms of the work or trauma or whatever it is that you're around that have
Yeah.
now become your own symptoms that need very intentional care. So that could look,
Yeah.
you know, intentional therapy. It could look
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
major changes. It could look like maybe I need a different job. Maybe I need
Mm-hmm.
to hire different childcare, whatever that may be. But when it gets to that level, it's kind of like, here's a big signal that there needs to be a major shift. Like this isn't going to work.
Yeah. So what if so for the listeners that
Mhm.
are parenting some really hard kids, and it's not the kid's fault. It's just like we just know like kids who have come from hard stuff need help healing themselves.
Right.
And that's why it's hard, right? Because healing is hard work. It's not just like, oh, put a band-aid on it and it's all better.
Mhm.
So, for the listeners who are caring for these kids who have big behaviors or, laundry list of diagnosis, just have harder stuff as they're trying to help them heal, what should they be pulling back and maybe noticing about themselves to say, oh, I might need to, not keep walking on this sprained ankle or not keep playing football with this concussion? What should they be mindful of
Mhm.
when they kind of pull back and kind of look at themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it can be so hard because, like we have, such a drive in us. It's like this double bind, like your child really needs you,
Yeah.
but like you have the least to give sometimes when
Yeah.
you're at that level. It's like they're looking to you for the safety and regulation, but if you have nothing left in you and you can't give that to them, it's just this cycle basically
Yeah.
that can be really hard. And I think absolutely if you're noticing within yourself things like being really heightened emotional responses or irritable or numb or really avoidant or hypervigilant, like those are all signs that you've reached your limit and you
Hmm.
really can't, you know, regulate somebody else when you yourself are operating at that
Hmm.
level. I mean, the way that we are uh, biologically made, we have mirror neurons
Yeah.
and those fire when we perform an action or we observe someone else performing an action, and that extends to our emotions. So if your child is anxious, your
Hmm.
brain is literally wiring itself to feel anxious too. You're not making that as a conscious choice. It's just literally how we're
Our
wired.
brains work. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And so, it helps us attune to our children. But if they're so dysregulated due to trauma, then that same mechanism that can be the most beautiful thing that can help them also can become the thing that is most overwhelming,
Hmm.
because then your nervous system is essentially processing trauma responses all day long, and not just your child's original trauma. And so
Yeah.
it's important to keep that in mind. I think it's easy to get caught up in this like shame spiral of like, I can't do enough, or why
Yeah.
can't, you know, I'm not a good enough parent, or I don't have any patience, and like really personalizing it. But
Yeah.
honestly, like it's truly just how we're all wired. And you can't take that on as a personal failure because that's almost adding fuel to the fire. Because if
Hmm.
you're already feeling dysregulated and then you're going to add a bunch of shame and self-blame and anger towards yourself on top of it, it's only going to dysregulate you more. And again,
Hmm.
it's just going to become worse and worse. So being able to recognize that and understand that, I think, is super important. Um, and just understanding kind of like our role of our nervous system of how much of that is automatic.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So essentially what we want to do is flip-flop that to where we are essentially putting off calm,
Yeah.
regulated, that our brain is putting that off, that energy. So then our kiddos, their mirror neurons can feel that from us, and it can be the opposite of what we've been doing this whole time.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, how do we get there?
Yeah. Well, I think, just like, with a sprained ankle, you have to be intentional about it, right? You can't just like push through it and hope that it's going to get better. It might ebb and flow a little bit, but it's going to trend downward likely.
Mm-hmm.
So being intentional, that can look like a bunch of different things. I always say the best thing to do is whatever is actually going to work for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we throw around self-care like, oh, like here's all these things you can do to feel better. But also, I think sometimes when people are at the point of that compassion fatigue or even that vicarious trauma, to add in like a meditation
Yeah.
routine or a workout routine, like when you're depleted,
Yeah.
can feel almost impossible. And, it's not because you're a failure, it's just because it's a lot and you're dealing with a lot. And so, absolutely, anytime you can bring in additional support, I think that is super important to not have to hold it alone. And that
Mm-hmm.
could be friends, that could be family, but that could be support groups, it could be therapy, doing your own therapy, not just like having your child do
Yeah.
therapy, I
That's
think
so
is
important.
super duper important because
Mhm.
you have to be able to hold your own story, whatever that is, alongside your child's. And if your child has experienced trauma or has really difficult behaviors, all of those things, that is traumatizing to you. And
Yeah.
even though, they may be the one that directly experienced something,
Mm-hmm.
as somebody who cares about them, it is going to impact you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not selfish to get your own help. In fact, that is like the best thing you can do for them. If you can figure out, how to regulate yourself and put those things into place and be able to process it and like let yourself feel all
Mm-hmm.
of the things, even if it feels wrong. Like it's okay to love your child so much and also just like really dislike being around them sometimes
Mm-hmm.
or
Oh yeah.
really frustrated with them and like letting yourself have permission to feel all of that so that you're not just this like ticking time bomb of irritability and knowing that that's okay and releasing yourself from whatever the expectations are. I think that's a really big step.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And also knowing that, again, with those mirror neurons, we're always triggering each other, we're
Mm-hmm.
reacting to each other. And there may be things that our child is doing that is triggering things in us that relate back to our own
Mm-hmm.
childhood or experience growing up or our work or overwhelm. And so when I say like doing your own therapy, it doesn't even just mean like learning strategies necessarily to support your child, although that's wonderful, but
Yeah.
also like doing your own work so
Yeah.
that if you can figure out like what are these patterns that I have within myself that I'm getting so activated or that I'm coping in this certain way that I have most of my life that's now becoming a problem. If you do that, your own healing around that and expand your own window of tolerance, then it's going to help those reactions when they come up so that you feel more equipped and hopefully those triggers aren't as strong and you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you're able to be more present in those moments. And that can be extremely healing in that process.
Well, and I think that's the opposite of what we do. And I don't know if it's because of culture, the way we were raised, human nature, combination of all of that. But if our kiddos are having a hard time, the first thing we do is get them into therapy, get them into, whatever they might need to feel better in their bodies at the expense of I fill up my calendar with all of these appointments for my kids,
Yeah.
and I'm going from the minute they wake up till the minute they go to bed, and I get
Mhm.
an hour to myself. And what am I going to do? I'm going to watch trash TV or scroll TikTok, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I want to just zone out and
Yeah.
numb, right?
Yeah.
So it's getting to a place where we can see like it's actually the opposite. We need to take care of ourselves first.
Mhm.
Why does that
Yeah.
feel so hard?
Well, I don't know if you've heard this. I feel like it floats around that, you got to put your own oxygen
Yeah.
mask on before you help someone else. And yes, that's great. But I think that, we have to almost think of that a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
because, especially if you're a parent of a traumatized child or children, it's kind of like trying to put on your own oxygen mask while the plane is like actively crashing and the
Mm-hmm.
child next to you is having a panic attack.
Mm-hmm.
And someone over the loudspeaker is suggesting that you need more self-care. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
okay, it's like, yes, I know I need self-care. I know I need to take care of myself, but
We're all about to
like we
die.
are plummeting into the ground, right? And so,
Yeah.
it sounds that's like a great analogy for like those little burnout things, a hard day. But I think when it comes to like that compassion fatigue and dealing with traumatized children, it's more useful to imagine something like, how do I create an oxygen rich environment for everyone in this family, including myself?
Mm-hmm.
And changing the environment shifts kind of out of that individual emergency response to more of like a sustainable life support system.
Mm-hmm.
So that could look like, building regulation practices into your daily family rhythm, or not just reserving them for crisis moments, not just like when something happens, you
Yeah.
respond, but just this is a practice that we do even on our best days.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one family I worked with created like regulation stations in their home. So they had like
I love
little
that.
corners with sensory tools and comfort items and visual reminders for children's and adults, which
Yeah.
that is key. It's not just for the child or the few children or whatever it is that need that regulation. It's also for adults to use.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important too, because not only are you using the tools that you also need, even though you're an adult, but you're also um, like showing your child
Mm.
that, you get dysregulated too, and that you can take care of yourself, and you're making a choice to go and take advantage of those tools and to take a breath and to walk away. And, if you're always perfect all the time and you handle things wonderfully 100% of the time and you're just like the best mom ever, which congratulations. I don't know that you actually exist, but if you do, I'd
Yeah.
love to meet you.
Right.
But also, I think that can kind of be a detriment too, because if your kids never see
Yeah.
you ever get dysregulated, then what are they going to feel about when they
Yeah.
inevitably do? Like, is that something wrong with them? No, it's just so human.
Yeah.
Even if you do blow up, even if you do lose your cool, like you always have the ability to go back and repair that.
Mm-hmm.
And that speaks volumes, because
Yeah.
inevitably in their life, they will have times that they blow up or that they say something that they shouldn't. And what do you want them to do in those situations is be
Right.
able to own it and accept responsibility and realize how that affected somebody. So if you can show them that, like, you're giving them such a huge gift.
Yeah. It's normalizing that it's okay to say I was wrong
Yeah.
and stay in the relationship and not just like run from it.
Right. And there's no time limit on that too,
Yeah.
because now in my practice, I work mainly with adults. Um, And even, we'll talk about things that happened way early in childhood or when they were younger. And I'll say, like, even now, today, 20, 30, 40 years later, if your parent were to just call you up and apologize for that, would it
Mm-hmm.
not matter? And they're like, no, like that would be
Mm-hmm. That'd be huge.
amazing. Like that would make such a huge difference. Like it's not like, oh, you have to, oh, I messed up then and now it's
That's
messed up
it.
forever. Like you
Mm-hmm.
always have the ability to repair things. You always do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. Well,
Mhm.
I love that modeling for our kids that we're not perfect
Yeah.
because I don't want my kids to grow up thinking they're perfect because then
But
what?
narcissists.
Yeah, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, thank you. I don't want that. So, yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
Um, so just kind of like along the same lines, but shifting gears a little bit. I work with a lot of families who have adopted and they have bio kids, and their bio kids maybe are experiencing some secondary trauma, and they're starting to see like, wow, this is really affecting our kids, right?
Yeah.
What do we do with that? What are some of the signs that we should be looking for too, that it could be affecting the other kids in the home?
Mhm. Yeah, when it comes to looking for signs, I think the biggest thing that I look for is any shift of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not always a negative shift.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've worked with so many people that have experienced all types of traumas, and their way of coping may have been to throw themselves into school and get straight A's, or sign up for every activity under the sun, or be the one who's being the little parent in the home and like helping
Mm-hmm.
and doing everything for everybody, right? So of course, I think we're all pretty aware of like the negative signs to look out for. If tantrums are starting, or they're have this major attitude, or they're really emotional, but also those positive things, quote, positive things, um, can be really concerning too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always just encourage that, like looking for any sort of major shift. And if it's a situation where, let's say, um, you adopted children and then later had your own biological kids, it may not be a shift because that's
Yeah.
all they've ever known, right? And
Yeah.
so I think being able to set aside time and try to have, really open and honest conversations just as you're growing up. And also, I think going back to yourself, of being really honest about how you feel. You can,
Mm-hmm.
like, by saying, man, I just get so overwhelmed sometimes when your brother does that, and I feel like the only thing that helps in those moments is when I just check out and just start cleaning the house. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's not the healthiest thing to do. I realize I'm doing that. I wonder if you ever feel that way, and like normalizing some of those things
Yeah.
for
Acknowledging
them.
that you do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is normal to do, like, we need to do something to cope. It doesn't,
Yeah.
we're doing whatever it is. And so being able to call that out as, okay, that's not necessarily just a personality trait, but that might also be something you're doing to cope with it, and
Yeah.
helping them know the difference. Also, I think, again, with expanding the support, in any way possible, identifying other safe people that they can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
um, if possible, other people that can really relate, um, because they might not always want to talk to mom or dad or whatever. And that's okay as long as they have options. In fact, I think giving options is probably the best thing to do, as
Mm-hmm.
long as it's somebody that you feel like you can trust. Of course, counseling for them, if that is something
Yeah.
that's, I mean, obviously I'm a counselor, so I'm kind of biased, but I think everybody could use
Yeah.
counseling regardless, and
No, I
everybody
know.
should.
Yeah,
Everybody gets
for
counseling.
sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think even just like any like touchstone of areas that they have that they can talk about what they're feeling, if that's with you as their parent or other identified people in their life, that can be really important for helping them normalize what they're feeling,
Yeah.
not develop their own shame around it, and be able to find healthy ways to cope with it and express whatever those emotions are.
Yeah. I feel like I hear a lot of parents too have their own like guilt feelings of maybe we shouldn't have done this because
Yeah.
we're, potentially harming our biological kids or harming the kids that are already in our home. And, I try to encourage families when they kind of go in that thought spiral, because I get it. Like that's where you go when you're feeling hopeless, when you are maybe feeling a little shame about how you've parented or decisions you've made. But how would you encourage parents to not see it as, a regretful thing, but or even like we've harmed our kids?
Yeah.
How would you
Yeah.
encourage them?
I mean, I do think there is a very valid level of grief that can come along with these things.
Yeah, for sure.
And that, again, it's not something to shame yourself for. It just is an
Hmm.
emotion of grieving or thinking about like what your family could have looked like had you not made this choice, or grieving maybe not really getting to experience, I don't know, a easy family vacation
Yeah.
or a um, calm environment all the time or something. Like you get to
Yeah.
grieve those things too. That's such a valid thing to feel.
Hmm.
And also, it's always the and also, right?
Hmm.
Like you can grieve those things and be sad and be upset, even angry, frustrated, and also um, holding space for the good, the reasons why you made that choice for your family, the ways in which that's helping your family grow, and also remembering that life is complicated, I think, for everybody in all sorts of ways. And
Hmm.
um, you know, there's gonna inevitably be things in your kid's life, whether it's now or years
Hmm.
down the road or way later in life that they're dealing with, um, that you can't shield everybody from
Yeah.
everything negative. And in fact, um, there's a lot of really important value, I think, in being able to learn in those experiences and
Hmm.
hopefully having like a safe environment to learn those strategies
Yeah.
before they go out into the world and deal with hardship in one way or another. And so you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
And sure, maybe things would have been different, but you also don't know, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you don't know what you don't know. And so you also can't live in that space,
Yeah.
but you can hold multiple emotions all at once, and letting
Hmm.
yourself feel that, I think, can be really freeing.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that makes me think of Inside Out at the end where
Mhm.
she learns that she can have both happy and or joy and sadness at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's what it is. And that's what
Mhm.
anything is, right? And helping
Yeah.
your child like find that language sometimes by, expressing your own mixed emotions, or, I talk every night at dinner, we go around the table and my kids talk about their best part of their day and their worst part of the
Hmm.
day. They're 4 and 8. So,
Okay.
um, but it's always an opportunity for me to help them find like the nuance in that of,
Yeah.
okay, their best part of their day was they did really great on their test. Okay, but they didn't like taking that test. They did, thought it was hard,
Yeah.
and it was the best part of their day, so like
Yeah. Yeah.
that in even those little moments that are pretty whatever at the end of the day, I think can be really powerful as well.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So kind of going back into this
Mhm.
idea of compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, as a caregiver slash parent, or maybe even teacher, coach, somebody who feels this with the kids in their lives, what would be a first step? Like, I want to say first step would be therapy, but
Yeah.
what would you say a first step would be? That might be too
Mhm.
big of a jump.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And I know there's a lot of barriers for some people to find therapy.
Yeah.
Um, I think of this example, I'll just use myself when I had my first child. Um, I had postpartum depression after that. My husband was deployed, he's in the military.
Mm.
I was kind of doing the single mom thing. I'm working in uh, rape crisis, like
Wow.
very intense job.
Yeah.
I was feeling that compassion fatigue really
Yeah.
hard. And I remember at the time, like I wanted to be able, like I would have loved to have like a workout routine a few days a week,
Yeah.
or to go get coffee with friends every now and then. And I could have made space for that stuff maybe, but then it felt like at the expense of, okay, like if I carve out that time to go get coffee, then I'm going to have to, move all this stuff around and here's all this extra stress. And it just kind of felt like, where does one even begin?
Yeah.
Um, and for me, the thing that I found in that time was there was like a 15-minute drive between dropping my son off at daycare and getting to work and then on the way home. So I had like 30 minutes of
Hmm.
my day that I was like, I usually listen to some random podcast or whatever, or news, um, kind of mindlessly, or I'm thinking about all the stuff I need to do for the day, and I'm just adding more stress to that time. And so I like really intentionally changed what I did with that 30 minutes total. I have 15 minutes to work, I have 15 minutes home. And it seems like such a small thing, but sometimes it
Yeah.
would be driving in complete silence. Other
Yeah.
times it would be playing, really upbeat music that I enjoyed. It
Mhm.
changed day to day on what it was that I did with that time. But just like even reclaiming that little bit of time
Mhm.
felt like adding like oxygen to the environment, that
Yeah.
it really did fuel me. And was it perfect? No. And was it still hard? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think we can all find something in our day, whether it's a short drive to work or whether it's, you know, I don't know, whatever, you get up 5 minutes earlier or on your lunch break instead of sitting at your desk eating your lunch and
Still
responding to
working.
emails or scrolling on it. Yeah, like go
Yeah.
outside and walk, or that's meet a friend for lunch twice a week or something. Like we can
Mhm.
all do something, even if it's with like a tiny amount of time. And I
Yeah.
think that that is usually a really good place to start, because it's usually within that little bit of time that we can spark more capacity for other things, whether
Yeah.
that's, oh, now I'm going to use this time to look for a counselor, or I'm
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
to, whatever it is, whatever it happens to be, and taking that shame off yourself of, yeah, maybe I could have used that time to return some phone calls or get caught up on things, but what's more important at the end of the day? Some
Mhm.
things can really truly wait,
Yeah.
even if they're important. And no, my podcast, maybe some would say it wasn't more important than returning that important phone call, but to me that was my
It was.
lifeline.
Yeah. Yeah. For
Yeah.
sure.
Hmm.
That's good. It's the baby steps, right? Like we can't just jump right into major change tomorrow. We have to take little baby steps to like get that capacity back and be able to breathe again so that we can
Right.
then take the next step. So that's
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I have so many more things I want to talk to you about, but also I'm going to honor our time. So we're going to be done for now. But I do actually have two more questions for you
Okay.
that I ask all of my guests. And the first one is, I asked this in the questionnaire I sent you. So, if you recognize the question, but just like, what do you wish more people thought about when it comes to trauma? And I really liked your answer. So I hope you
I'm
remember
trying
what
to
you
remember what I
put.
put.
It was about, you just talked about like, it's the in between those big moments that are so
Mhm.
important, the little pieces that we don't really think about that lead to healing that are so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. I mean, kind of like what I was just saying with the finding like those tiny little pockets of self-care. I
Hmm.
think it's the same when it comes to like healing and trauma. It's those little movements. I often feel like sometimes people can get so down on themselves about not seeing enough change quick enough, or, whatever the case may be, but also like I always say, and I hear in trauma work, that slow is fast and
Hmm.
fast is slow. And
Hmm.
that's so true, especially when it comes to building like your nervous system capacity. It's
Yeah.
like if I just went to the gym for the first time ever and picked up the heaviest weights and just started like going for it, right? Like I'm gonna
Yeah.
get injured. That's actually
Yeah.
not going to be a great idea, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like those slow things that build the capacity over time. And I think too, with like trauma and healing, that it's like, oh, I set that boundary with somebody and I wasn't as nervous this time, or I wasn't as nervous as I thought I may be, like that's huge. That's so
Mm-hmm.
huge. It's like something to be celebrated, even if it feels small. It's such huge change in our system when we start
Yeah.
to notice those little things happening.
Yeah. And we don't always pay attention to those little things.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Okay, so then what would three resources be that you would recommend to our listeners who I mean, if you have something off the top of your head specifically about compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, burnout, but parenting kids from heart in general, what would three
Mhm.
resources be that you would recommend?
There's so many good ones out there. I think I said
Mm-hmm.
earlier, like whatever works for you
Mm-hmm.
is going to be the best resources. Usually, when I'm suggesting resources to clients or whoever, I want to know from them, like, okay, if you're not a reader,
Yeah.
you're not going to read a book. I'm not going to
I'm
recommend
not going
books,
to tell you. Yeah. Yeah.
or if you're not a podcast person, I'm not going to recommend a podcast
Yeah.
or whatever. And so I think number one is figuring out like how do you best take in information,
Mm-hmm.
um, and kind of starting from there. And because I do think there is so much good stuff out there
Mm-hmm.
for whatever way you can take in information, whether that is if you're a reader or an audiobook person,
Yeah.
um, or if it's like short form content, there's some amazing social media creators that
Yeah.
put a lot of great stuff out there. I know like on my platform, I try to make things as like bite sized and easy to
Yeah.
understand as possible while also making sure it's like research backed. And so I
Yeah.
think being mindful about who you're following, but there's so many great people out there that some are humorous, whatever it may be. So I guess in terms of like recommending a single resource, it's hard for
Mm-hmm.
me to do. It's more about finding whatever that platform is or that style in which you can take in information, and kind of running with that. I think anything, especially with talking about trauma,
Mm-hmm.
anything that centers around um, like the nervous system
Yeah.
and you're like I keep talking about like little things to expand your own capacity,
Mm-hmm.
anything around that, because you can do little actions, you can think, positive thoughts, and that's all great. But if you really want to make lasting change, it's really understanding yourself and what's going on in your own system when you're feeling activated.
Yeah.
Um, and so anything having to do with like the window of tolerance or
Mm-hmm.
nervous system health, I think can be a really important place to start.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. I know that it's not specific, but I will link like some of these terms that you've used just so that people can go back and be able to just do like look up whether it's on TikTok or Instagram or,
Yeah.
audiobooks, podcasts. I mean, there's so many
Mhm.
different ways that we can blog posts. There's people that blog still.
Mhm. Yeah.
Don't you blog?
I I guess it's called a blog. I have a Substack. I put out an article
Yeah.
every week. And so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I try to do that. Like some people like, or I'll put a short form video on Instagram or whatever, and people are like, but what about this? And what about this information? Where's the research? I'm like, well, I only get like 30 seconds. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
ah. But I do have, my Substack where I go much more in depth and I can include
Yeah.
resources for those people. I say, go to my Substack and you can look
Yeah.
at all of that. Um,
And
so yeah.
I'll link that too because I think that
Okay.
you're an amazing resource and gosh, I just think even if people just start following you, that's going to be really helpful for them.
Mhm.
So I will link your information in there too. But yeah, I just
Thanks.
appreciate all of your knowledge and everything that you shared today. I think that my listeners are going to feel encouraged. I loved how you gave the analogy of the oxygen mask and like, nope, we need to oxygenate the whole environment. I think that's
Yeah.
really important. And I know that I took that away. So I think somebody else will at least, right? So
Good.
yeah, I appreciate all of your conversation today, everything you shared. So
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. I'm always
yeah,
happy to do it.
good, good. Well, have a great rest of your morning, right? No.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.